You didn't land here by accident. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was that quiet pull inside you when you heard the word empath. If that's you, welcome. But know this, we're not here to talk about sensitivity in the way it's usually sold to us. This isn't just about feeling deeply. No, we're diving into something far more ancient, more mysterious, more powerful. Because when I say empath, I'm not talking about someone who simply picks up on others' emotions. I'm talking about someone who becomes a channel, an open conduit through which the unconscious energies of others, and sometimes the collective itself, pour in. And that, my friend, is not always a blessing. In fact, the way our culture glamorizes empathy, that should raise a red flag. Whenever something becomes too easily digestible, too trendy, it's often been stripped of its true power. The real empath, the one I've seen in dreams, archetypes, and years of inner work, is not a floating, peaceful caricature. They are a weight bearer, a shadow carrier, often unaware of just how much they've taken on. To understand this, what it really means to be an empath, we have to look beneath the surface, beneath the personal, beneath even the interpersonal. The empath doesn't just read people well. They're psychically open, often unconsciously, to the archetypal energies that live within those people. Imagine this, a village healer in ancient times, kneeling in the fields during a storm, vomiting blood, not because she's sick, but because the land itself is unwell. That's the empath, feeling what was never theirs to carry, transmuting what they don't own, and unless they become conscious of this function, it will consume them. I had a dream once, long before I had the words for archetypes or shadow work. In the dream, there was a woman standing on a bridge over a vast, dark chasm. She had no eyes. Her hands were stretched out in front of her, trembling, like she was both asking for help and warding off something unseen. Below her, in the pit, were countless voices, screaming, crying, longing. She couldn't see them, but she felt every one of them. Each voice a wound etched onto her body. That woman, that dream, is the empath. Blind not in sight, but in understanding. Blind to where the pain begins and where she ends. She is the psychic sponge, but no one ever taught her how to wring herself out. And here's the danger. To be a vessel is sacred, yes, but a vessel without wisdom, that's a recipe for psychic collapse, because the unconscious doesn't care about your morals. It's wild, chaotic, divine. When an empath opens themselves to others, whether by choice or by sheer energetic openness, they don't just feel emotions, they absorb unprocessed shadow material. And most people walk around with enormous shadows, untouched and unclaimed. What's unloved in one person goes looking for refuge, and the empath becomes that refuge, if they're not careful. There's a story from African tribal lore. I came across it in my studies. A young dreamer would walk the forest's edge where the veil between worlds thins. He'd hear spirits calling, spirits with no name, not with words, but with feelings. Waves of fear, sorrow, rage. These spirits would whisper through him. He'd begin weeping in silence, trembling in stillness, laughing when nothing was funny. The tribe thought he was possessed and called for the elder. But the elder didn't banish the spirits. He taught the dreamer how to speak with them, how to name them. That is your task too. To be an empath without discernment is to be a playground for other people's disowned shadows. But to be an empath who can name what they carry, that's the path of the alchemist. It's not enough to say, I feel what others feel. That's surface level. You have to ask, why do I feel it? Where does it enter me? What am I doing with it? Because empathy, at its worst, is a subtle form of possession. The unconscious doesn't always show up with horns and a pitchfork. Sometimes it arrives disguised as compassion so deep it drowns you, or a compulsion to help that destroys your boundaries, or love for someone whose shadow has mistaken your body for a graveyard. I've seen it again and again. Empaths falling in love with those who are actively wounding them, not because they're weak, but because they've unconsciously bonded to the other's pain. They become the caretaker, the rescuer, the silent sponge. But underneath that is something more dangerous. A dark marriage I've called enantiodromia, the turning into the opposite. The healer becomes the harmed. The bearer of light becomes the host of darkness. And the longer that pattern goes unchecked, the more the empath forgets who they are beneath all the pain. If you resonate with this, hear me. Your gift isn't just emotional. It's psychic. It's archetypal. You're not just tuned into surface feelings, you're tapping into collective currents that shape human behavior. When someone steps into your presence, you're not just sensing their smile or their tears, you're sensing their ancestry, their buried gods, their unlived lives. And if you haven't made contact with your own unconscious, your shadow, your hidden motives, you will be overwhelmed. There's a temptation, especially in spiritual circles, to romanticize empathy, to treat it like a superpower. But every gift casts a shadow, and empathy, perhaps more than any other gift, draws that shadow to the surface. Do you know what happens when someone represses rage for years? It doesn't vanish. It just waits. And then, when that person meets an unguarded empath, that rage jumps, like fire into dry brush. And suddenly the empath is irritable, exhausted, inflamed, without realizing they're carrying a flame that was never theirs. I once worked with a woman who cried every time she walked into my office. No words, just tears. At first, she believed she was crying over her own past, her parents, her failed relationships. And yes, there were wounds. But as we explored deeper, something else emerged. She wasn't just mourning her life. She was carrying the unwept sorrow of her mother, her grandmother, and generations of women before her. Women who were never allowed to cry. She had become their vessel. And in doing so, she lost the ability to know what was hers. This is why discernment is everything. If you don't draw the line between what's yours and what isn't, you will drown in ghosts. The gift of feeling is sacred, yes, but sacred things need structure. The vessel must be strong. If it's not, the fire it's meant to contain will burn it down. There's another dream I need to share with you. A man stands alone inside a cathedral made entirely of mirrors. Every step he takes echoes, but the voices don't belong to him. As he moves past each mirror, he expects to see his own reflection, but instead, he sees others. A crying child, a screaming soldier, a grieving mother. Each mirror offers a different face, a different pain. And the man begins to panic. He cries out, "Which one is me?" But the mirrors do not answer. They only reflect. This is the empath's dilemma. They lose themselves in the mirrors of other people's emotions, other people's traumas, other people's unspoken grief. They become so entangled in the psychic field of everyone else that they forget the shape of their own soul. And unless they ask the terrifying question, who was I before I began to feel everyone else's pain? They will live in perpetual fragmentation. If this feels familiar, ask yourself, what work have I done to truly know myself? Not in terms of spiritual labels or personality types, but through confrontation, through shadow work, through dissent. Have you faced your own wounds, your own shadow motives? The parts of you that use empathy as a way to feel important, needed, even holy? It's not easy to admit, but many empaths carry a quiet satisfaction in being the one who understands, the one who helps, the one who bears the pain. That's not compassion. That's ego dressed in virtue. And the unconscious, it smiles at such illusions. Because empathy, when unconscious, becomes a disguise, a distraction, a way of avoiding your own silence, your own stillness, your own unmet grief. We are strange beings, you and I. We cloak avoidance in virtue. We turn the pain of others into a purpose for ourselves. And sometimes being needed feels safer than being alone. But empathy is not salvation, it's a threshold. And if you want to cross it wisely, you must learn the art of boundaries. Not the defensive walls that shut the world out, but the sacred container of an individuated soul. The kind of boundary that allows you to say, I feel you, but I do not become you. I see your pain, but I will not house it inside my body. I offer presence, not possession. This is the ultimate aim. Not to absorb others, but to witness them. And that, more than anything, may be what the empath has forgotten. How to witness without merging. How to love without bleeding. How to care without collapsing. Because the greatest tragedy for an empath is to become invisible to themselves. To be so consumed by the suffering around them that their own soul fades to a whisper. And yet, this happens all the time. In marriages, where one partner unconsciously becomes the emotional caretaker of the other. In families, where the most sensitive child becomes the emotional thermostat for the household. In therapists, teachers, ministers, people whose compassion slides so easily into codependence, they forget their own boundaries. And this confusion, it's not just psychological, it's archetypal possession. When an empath loses the ballast of their own inner work, they become consumed by the wounded healer archetype, what the ancient Greeks knew as Chiron. And when Chiron rises in the psyche unexamined, it demands suffering as a form of purpose. It seduces the empath into believing that their value lies in how much they can hurt for others. This is distortion. This is the shadow of the healer. The complex that tells you you are only valuable if you suffer alongside others or suffer for them. But that's not healing. That's entrapment. And you must understand, archetypes are not just metaphors. They're living patterns, ancient, powerful forces that shape behavior across time and culture. Older than history, older than myth. So when you walk into a room and feel heavy for no reason, when you're overwhelmed after a conversation, when you're energized by being needed, but later find yourself drained, stop. Pause. These may not be your feelings. They may be the invisible echoes of archetypes working through you. The savior, the martyr, the eternal mother, the seducer. These energies love to animate an unconscious empath, turning them into a puppet on spiritual strings. But puppets don't individuate. Puppets perform. And if you want to become whole, if you want to truly transform your gift into wisdom, you must begin the sacred act of separation. Separation not from love, but from entanglement. Not from presence, but from fusion. This isn't coldness. This is warmth with a spine. This is soul with structure. This is you standing before someone else's anguish and saying, I will not abandon you, but I will not bleed for you. This is the moment you begin to become a vessel, not a sponge. To witness pain without swallowing it whole. To sit beside someone drowning and say, I see you, I feel you, but I will not become the ocean. There's a dream I once encountered from a patient. In it, a forest, ancient, dense, full of roots reaching like fingers through time. At the center of that forest, a stone well, deep and bottomless. Around it sat many people, empaths, each holding their hands over their hearts, crying. In the well were the shadows of those they loved. The empaths leaned in, hoping that if they cried hard enough, cared enough, they could lift the shadows into the light. But the well had no bottom, and their tears only fed it. This is what happens when empathy becomes compulsion. It feeds the very darkness it seeks to redeem. Because here's the truth, few are willing to say. Not everyone wants to be healed. Not every soul is ready to awaken. And the empath who confuses their gift with responsibility will spend their life trying to save people who have no desire to be saved. And in doing so, they'll be pulled into the same pit. You must discern. Does your empathy liberate, or does it entrap? Does it honor the path of the other, or does it violate it by insisting they change? Even healing can become control when it arises from fear. There are parents whose empathy suffocates their children, lovers whose sensitivity manipulates, friends whose compassion masks a deep desire to be irreplaceable. This is the shadow side of empathy, where care becomes currency, where feelings become power. You may be recoiling right now, thinking, not me. But if you truly want to be a conscious empath, turn the gaze inward. Ask yourself, where has my gift become a mask? Where have I confused connection with obligation? Where have I made myself essential to others in order to avoid the discomfort of being alone? These are not accusations. They are invitations. Because true empathy doesn't ask you to dissolve. It asks you to integrate. It invites you to feel, yes, but to remain whole. To open your heart without abandoning your spine. To love deeply without hollowing yourself in the process. Let's continue with a truth many empaths have felt, even if they haven't said it out loud. This path, this gift, can feel like a curse when it's not handled with wisdom. When it's unconscious, empathy becomes a kind of possession, a full-body takeover that doesn't ask permission. And one of the most overlooked sources of that possession? Ancestral grief. Some of you aren't just carrying your emotions, you're carrying echoes from generations past. Sensitivity can be passed down like an heirloom. Sometimes it was once sacred. Your great-grandmother may have been a village healer, a midwife, a seer. But in this modern world, where intuition is often dismissed or ridiculed, that same sensitivity becomes a burden. I worked with a woman once who couldn't handle crowded spaces. Her whole body would start to tremble. She had no trauma of her own in such environments. But through dream work and deep inner inquiry, she uncovered ancestral roots, a lineage of women persecuted for their spiritual gifts. Her body was remembering something her mind could not. In another case, a man who struggled to trust his intuition carried unconscious guilt. His ancestors had been burned as witches during a dark period in history. Somewhere in his psyche, sensitivity had become dangerous, something to be buried, hidden beneath overthinking or emotional reactivity. He didn't need less empathy. He needed to reconnect to it without the ancestral shame wrapped around it. This is why healing isn't just personal, it's generational. Many empaths are unknowingly acting as the emotional processing centers for their families. They absorb the rage no one talks about, the grief no one dares cry over, the fear that hides behind every polite smile. They don't just feel, they transmit. They try to heal what hasn't been named, let alone resolved. And the dreams they carry reveal this truth in archetypal language. Serpents wrapped around the heart, children drowning in oceans of sorrow, ancestral homes burning down while the dreamer stands there, unable to move. These aren't just personal symbols. They're messages from the deep psyche saying, "You are too full of what isn't yours." I had a patient, an artist, brilliant, sensitive. She came to me with a recurring dream, walking through an ancient museum. Inside were sculptures of everyone she had ever loved. Each sculpture had a small plaque that read, "Do not touch, property of the dead." But every time she touched them anyway, and every time they bled. When she told me the dream, I said, "This isn't punishment. This is instruction." She wasn't empathizing. She was resurrecting the dead, pulling past pain into the present moment. Her empathy had turned into necromancy, keeping trauma alive through endless refeeling. That's the shadow side of unrefined empathy. Not all pain is yours to feel. Not all suffering is yours to carry. Some pain belongs to history. Some wounds were never meant to be inherited, and yet, here you are, walking through the psychic battlefield, mistaking every fallen soul for someone you're supposed to save. But you are not here to be a gravedigger for the collective. You are not here to dig up corpses and call it compassion. You are here to discern, to feel with clarity, not compulsion. So what's the alternative? Should we shut it all down? Harden our hearts? Turn away from suffering to protect ourselves? No. We refine, we transmute. We take empathy and forge it into something else, something strong, something sacred. Not a sponge, but a sword. Not an open wound, but a listening mirror. Not a martyr, but a mystic. Because the true empath is not fragile. The true empath is initiated. They've walked through shadow, not once, but many times. They've stopped bleeding for people who never asked for healing. They've faced their rage, their shame, their fear. And because of this, they're no longer easy prey for the unconscious projections of others. They can feel without fusing. They can witness without drowning. They can care deeply without disappearing. From that place, their gift becomes radiant. Not because they're self-sacrificing, but because they're self-possessed. And yet, even here, at the threshold of power, another challenge emerges. Because when the empath becomes empowered, another archetype awakens. The magician. This is the one who sees through illusions, the one who can speak to shadows with precision, the one who understands energy, resonance, and the flow of emotion through a room. It's a beautiful archetype. But like all powerful patterns, it has a shadow. If the magician forgets humility, they begin to think they're above suffering. They start to manipulate with insight. They wear wisdom as armor, and empathy becomes control. Now they're not just absorbing pain, they're shaping it, bending it, using it. And the cycle repeats. So hear me clearly, initiation is not a trophy. It's not a badge you wear once and never question again. It's a daily choice, a daily vigilance. To be a conscious empath is to wake up each morning and ask, is this mine? Am I feeling or am I fusing? Am I helping or am I controlling? Am I present or am I performing? These are not signs of insecurity. These are signs of maturity. Because the conscious empath no longer fears being unsure. They don't rush to fix or soothe. They've learned the sacred power of silence. They allow others to be broken. They allow themselves to be still. They trust that sometimes pain isn't a signal to intervene. Sometimes pain is a doorway, not an enemy, a threshold. And this changes everything in relationships too. The unconscious empath is drawn to the wounded, the chaotic, the narcissistic. Not because they're gullible, but because they're still operating from an old belief. If I endure enough, I'll be loved. They confuse chaos with chemistry. They chase those who echo their childhood pain. They think their value lies in surviving mistreatment with grace. But the conscious empath? They crave clarity. They choose people who see them, not just need them. They build relationships rooted in truth, not trauma. And when loneliness comes, they don't fill it with the ghosts of broken souls. They sit with it. They listen. They let the silence speak. Because that silence, that's where the real work begins. Here are 60 detailed original image prompts for Runway AI based on your philosophical video script about empaths and Jungian depth psychology. Each prompt is crafted to reflect a unique idea, section, or emotional beat of the script, combining archetypal depth with visual metaphor. These prompts are written for ethereal lighting, soft gradients, and introspective, moody visual storytelling, ideal for philosophical YouTube content. 120. The shadow side of the empath archetype 1. A woman without eyes standing on a crumbling bridge over a chasm of screaming faces, hands trembling, oil painting style, deep indigo and gold tones, ethereal glow. A transparent figure kneeling in a storm-torn field, vomiting black smoke into the soil while spirits swirl above, symbol of psychic transmutation. 3. An ancient cauldron bubbling with chaotic symbols, rage, sorrow, longing, hovering over a figure pouring themselves unknowingly into it. 4. A mirrored cathedral filled with faceless people holding pieces of shattered emotions, soft golden reflections bouncing off dark marble. A cloaked empath standing at the edge of a village, absorbing shadows from the people with glowing trails flowing into their chest. 6. A healer vomiting ancestral blood into the roots of a dying tree, while the tree begins to glow faintly. Transformation of inherited pain. 7. An empath tangled in golden threads of other people's emotions, suspended mid-air like a marionette with strings from unseen forces. 8. A lone child walking the forest edge, surrounded by translucent ghost-like spirits whispering feelings into their ears, oil sketch style. 9. A mask of light cracking open to reveal a hollow interior filled with shadows screaming silently. 10. A figure made of smoke standing under moonlight, absorbing emotions like rain from countless faces above them. 11. A dreamlike library with floating archetypes, mother, martyr, savior, seducer, each trying to pull a golden soul into their books. 12. An empath holding an ancient bowl filled with water, each ripple reflecting someone else's face, none of which are their own. 13. A mirror with no reflection, only storm clouds and symbols behind the glass, representing loss of self and others' suffering. 14. A sacred well in the middle of a forest, surrounded by kneeling empaths crying into it, their tears feeding ancestral spirits below. A mirror-faced figure dissolving slowly into a fog of collective sorrow, surrounded by archetypal masks floating around it. 16. A room filled with ticking clocks, each with a different heartbeat, symbolizing the empath's entanglement with many timelines. 17. A symbolic scale tipping from gold to ash as the empath absorbs too much sorrow from another soul. 18. An ocean of black water filled with floating fragments of memory, a lone empath boat drifting between them, lit by a small inner fire. 19. A forest filled with statues of crying ancestors, the empath walking barefoot and absorbing their weeping through glowing footsteps. 20. A dreamscape with caves on either side of a bridge, one filled with empathy, the other with autonomy, an empath trying to cross. 21 to 40. Ancestral sorrow, inner work, and the unconscious contracts. 21. A transparent woman seated in a therapist's chair, slowly becoming visible as ancestral spirits rise and leave her body like smoke. 22. A chained empath locked in a temple made of ancestral bones, trying to read a scroll written in tears. 23. A woman cradling a shadowy child that dissolves in her arms, representing inherited generational sorrow. 4. A golden spine piercing through the earth, rooted deeply, while a heart-shaped flame glows softly above it. Spine and soul alignment. 25. An empath walking barefoot over cracked earth filled with other people's pain, each step creating ripples of light or shadow. 26. A boy holding a mirror to his face, but the reflection is his father's angry stare, symbol of childhood emotional reading. A burning ancestral house in the background, while an empath stands holding the ashes of women who were never allowed to cry. 28. A swirling vortex of emotional symbols, guilt, love, fear, trauma, Pulling an empath down a psychological spiral. 29. A field of glass roses growing from the soil, each rose containing a trapped face of an ungrieved ancestor. A museum filled with bleeding statues labeled Property of the Dead. A single empath ignoring the sign to reach out. 31. A glowing thread connecting an empath to dozens of people from their past, each thread pulling in a different direction. A dim cave with hieroglyphs glowing faintly, depicting cycles of rescue, burnout, and identity loss through generations. 33. A golden mask slowly melting as the empath begins to acknowledge their shadow motives, wanting to be needed, loved, or irreplaceable. A burning crown resting on the head of a martyr figure, symbolizing the pain of confusing suffering with meaning. 35. A storm-wrapped mountain with empaths climbing it, each carrying someone else's emotional baggage instead of their own. 36. A mirror in the shape of a heart that reflects back dozens of emotions not belonging to the viewer. 37. An empath walking through a city of shadows. Each shadow turns toward them, whispering "save me" in different voices. 38. An altar of bones where the empath leaves offerings of their own peace to gain fleeting purpose. 39. A puppeteer figure above an empath, pulling archetypal strings, savior, seducer, mother, all made of light. 40. An empath collapsing under a tree of collective suffering, each branch weighted with another person's wound. 41 to 60. Individuation, detachment, and empowerment. 41. An empath standing in a circle of fire, completely untouched, whispering, "I feel you, but I am not you," as the flames begin to calm. A sword made of empathy and discernment, glowing between two hands, offered but not used to cut. 43. A mirror reflecting a self that has never merged, unburned and luminous, surrounded by archetypes bowing in reverence. 44. A glowing spine behind a cloaked figure walking through a room of chaotic emotions, unshaken, calm, and sovereign. A phoenix with wings made of emotion rising from a battlefield of broken archetypes. 46. A woman standing before a still lake, her reflection showing not wounds but potential. Symbol of awakened empathy. 47. A boy sitting with his loneliness in silence, while ghosts of former rescuers float away into the night. An ancient temple collapsing as the empath walks away holding only a small flame, their true self. A healed empath offering presence without absorbing, their hands cupped but not touching the other's suffering. 50. A burning script unraveling in midair, representing old unconscious contracts with pain dissolving. 51. A constellation of emotional archetypes realigning around a centered, glowing soul, symbolizing individuation. 52. A man sitting on a cliff with ancestral ghosts behind him, no longer controlling him, but watching in peace. 53. A spine of roots connecting an empath's feet to the core of the earth while they face the sky in silence. 54. An open hand holding a spark of another person's emotion, observing it without merging, bathed in soft light. 55. A cave filled with shadows behind glass walls, and the empath walking past them calmly without opening any. A throne made of silence, where the empath finally sits and listens only to their own soul. 57. A glowing map of the psyche laid out before an empath, showing paths of detachment, truth, and aligned love. A mirror shattered into three, the past self, the overgiver, and the soul, each piece glowing with knowledge. 59. A cosmic river of archetypes flowing past an anchored empath who watches but does not enter. 60. An awakened empath standing in front of a dark forest, hands open, eyes glowing softly, saying, "I walk with you, but I do not carry you." Would you like me to help format these into an AI video storyboard? Or link each image prompt to specific timestamps or key quotes in the script for seamless production planning?